Amid tens of thousands of roaring fans, a young rising star proudly ripped off his cross necklace, hurled it onto the pitch, and shouted, "I trust my legs, not God." Moments later, a sickening crack of bone echoed through the stadium. He collapsed, his once immortal career teetering on the edge. Was it merely a freak sports injury, or a chilling warning from the very one he had justified? This is no fiction. It has happened before, again and again, in the world of football, where athletes are exalted like saints one minute, only to plummet into the abyss of despair the next. Arrogance can lift a man high for a fleeting moment, but only God can rescue him from the depths that last forever. The halo of a Prodigy Brazil, late 1990s. A sweltering afternoon in the outskirts of Rio de Janeiro. The rain had just broken, leaving the red dirt road patched with puddles. In a shabby neighborhood of half-built brick walls and leaky tin roofs, children poured into the dusty clearing to play. Their match needed no referee, no real goalposts. The ball was a cheap plastic one, cracked and held together with strips of silver duct tape. Among them, one skinny boy stood out. His sandals were worn flat, straps torn and held with bits of wire, yet his feet moved as if touched by magic. Every feint sent friends stumbling to the ground. Every touch of the ball felt tailor-made, stitched to perfection. And then, one thunderous strike. The ball soared, knocking over the soda can they used as a goal, rolling away to the sound of wild cheers. One friend gasped, shouting, "This kid. God must have laid his hand on him." The words echoed, spreading like a prophecy whispered through the alleyways. The title, Soccer Prodigy, began to take root, drifting beyond the dirt lot, spilling into nearby districts. Before he was even old enough to lace up proper boots, the boy was called into the city's youth team. At just 15, newspapers splashed his photo, lifting his very first trophy, beaming with a smile that lit up like fire. Commentators on TV couldn't hold back. This is a once-in-a-generation talent, the future of Brazilian football. Yet in that radiant gaze, behind the innocence of a child, flickered something more. Not just the joy of victory, but a dawning realization, I'm special. I'm not like the others. That look was both dazzling and dangerous. For from the very moment he was hailed as God's chosen, he began to believe destiny rested solely in the power of his own 2 feet. The arrogant cry on the pitch of the stadium was packed to the rafters. A decisive match, tension strung as tight as a violin's string. The clock ticked into its final minute. The ball rolled to his feet. The crowd held its breath. A quick turn, then a strike like thunder, net bulging, goal sealed. The stands erupted, a tidal wave of voices crashing in unison. His team had been pulled back from the cliff of defeat. They called it the goal of destiny. While tens of thousands of hearts pounded together, one young reporter wrote something different. He didn't hail the golden feet, but instead called the goal a miracle from God. To the rising star, it felt like a dagger to his pride, an attempt to strip away the glory he believed was his alone. And so, under the glare of live television, he tore the chain from his neck, the cross dangling from it glinting under the floodlights, and hurled it onto the emerald grass, still marked with the imprint of his winning strike. The silver shimmered like a declaration of rebellion. With his chest heaving, he shouted, "I trust these legs, not God." The words sliced through the electric air like a razor's edge. For a heartbeat, the stadium fell silent. Then the roar returned, louder, wilder, as if arrogance itself had been crowned bravery. But in the shadows of the stands, an old coach, the man who had guided him from ragged beginnings, slowly leaned on his cane and stepped forward. He himself had once been a legend, his career shattered by injury, and the bitterness of that fall had etched wisdom into his bones. His voice trembled but held firm. "Son, the proud will always be brought low." The warning was spoken, but it slipped past the ears of the boy drowning in his own brilliance. He saw nothing beyond his own blinding light, unaware that this was only the overture to a brutal collision with faith waiting just ahead. The fracture of fate the next match. Floodlights blazed, His name roared from every corner of the stadium. He strode onto the pitch with the swagger of a man convinced the world lay beneath his boots. Every touch ignited the crowd, every dribble left defenders shaken. But in football, glory and disaster live just a heartbeat apart. A brutal clash erupted at midfield. His opponent lunged in with a savage tackle. The crack of impact rang out, chilling, unmistakable. The stadium froze. He crumpled onto the grass, clutching his leg, screaming in agony. The sickening sound of bone snapping carried so far that even fans in the upper stands shivered. The camera zoomed in, his face twisted, distorted by unbearable pain. The once deafening cheers died instantly, replaced by a suffocating silence. Some fans covered their mouths. Others wept. On a sideline, the old coach leaned on his cane, his gaze heavy, as if he had foreseen this very moment. The words he once spoke seemed to echo in the night. The proud will always be brought low. As the stretcher carried him away, the night sky above seemed to drape itself in mourning. The world of football had waited for the prodigy to rise to glory. But now it was as if God himself had placed a cruel, unshakable question mark over the very legs once hailed as untouchable. Returned from the nightmare, the days after the fateful fall were nothing short of a waking nightmare. The sterile chill of the operating room, the hiss of scalpels, the clatter of metal, waves of pain drilling into his bones, it all became his new reality. For months, he lay motionless. The fire once burning in his eyes was replaced with rage and despair. But slowly, through sheer willpower and the hunger to return, he began the long road of recovery. Step by step, bead by bead of sweat falling onto the training floor, he fought his way back. The first day the ball rolled to his feet again, his legs trembled as if they no longer belonged to him. Yet one soft touch was enough to make the rehab room erupt in cheers. From that moment, the press baptized him with a new name, the immortal, the man who had risen from the dead. Opportunities soon flooded in, offers from glittering clubs in the great cities, even from distant countries. He chose to leave, bidding farewell to his hometown team and the old coach who had carried him through his darkest nights. At the final parting, the coach's words were simple but weighty. Don't forget the people, don't forget this country, and don't forget God. He nodded, head bowed, but inside his pride swelled. He believed he had conquered fate with his own two legs, not with any blessing from above. As he boarded the plane, he carried with him that pride, mixed with the thrill of a new land waiting ahead. A land of bright lights, riches, fame, and pleasures. But in those dazzling gates also lay a trapdoor, one that would soon plunge him into a downfall beyond anything he had ever imagined. The fall within the spotlight, the new city welcomed him with blinding lights, giant billboards plastered with his face, and the roar of adoring crowds. He rose swiftly into stardom, embraced by a world where money flowed like an endless river and temptations lurked around every corner. All-night parties, glasses of liquor glittering under neon light, tiny pills that dissolved every limit. He surrendered willingly to the sweet spiral. Beautiful women flocked around him. Fame cloaked him like a crown. He laughed with arrogance, raising his glass as though he were the eternal victor in a game without end. Back home, his faithful wife still waited, counting the months of his absence. He had once promised to bring her over to share in the dream. But that promise lay buried beneath nightclub beats and the glances of other women. Then one day, the newspapers splashed his photo, hand in hand with a stunning young woman, introduced as his new wife. To him, it was another trophy, a prize befitting a champion, proof of wealth, power, and irresistible allure. He believed he was merely reaping what he deserved, that the world itself had been created to worship his golden feet. But behind the radiant smile on magazine covers, behind the supercars and luxury apartments, a crack was spreading silently. A fracture not only in his marriage, not only in his family, but deep within his soul, where the spotlight's glare was slowly blotting out every way of escape. teammates left behind while he basked beneath the floodlights of the grand stage. His old teammates back home still trained in the rain and wind. They had once fought shoulder to shoulder with him, shared the pain, the sweat, even the blood spilled on the pitch. They were the ones who lifted him up after his fateful fracture, the ones who cheered with every goal he scored. Yet when reporters asked about his past, about those very men, he only offered a faint, dismissive smile. In a televised interview, he spoke words that cut like a blade, severing every tie in a single stroke. "I don't need anyone. All I need are these legs." The statement left many stunned. His former teammates lowered their heads in silence, and the old coach simply shook his eyes heavy with sorrow. To him, this was no longer the boy he once knew, nor even the star footballer the world adored, but a soul slashing away every bond that tied him to his home, to brotherhood, and to God himself. From that moment, he began the lonely ascent to the summit, a peak where isolation hides behind the glare of fame. And from that moment, the tragedy began to take shape, like a storm gathering strength, waiting for its appointed hour to strike. The explosion of tragedy, the spotlight, had barely begun to fade when darkness struck. One morning, tabloids across the globe unleashed a sex tape, him and his new wife, caught in grainy footage. The images were blurred, but the face, the tattoos, the unmistakable laugh left no doubt. The world reeled. Fans who once worshipped him now raged online, branding him a degenerate, a traitor to his family. Before the scandal could cool, another blow landed. His doping test came back positive. The press howled like a pack of wolves, headlines screaming in crimson, million-dollar star exposed as a fraud. Photos of him hoisting trophies under stadium lights were now paired with images of him hanging his head, shuffling out of a testing room, besieged by cameras. The storm of public opinion shredded everything. Sponsors tore up contracts. Supporters burned his jersey in the streets. Banners with his name were ripped to pieces. It was a public trial without defense, millions of voices united in condemnation. In a darkened room, he clutched his head, eyes bloodshot. The words he once bellowed live on television, "I trust these legs, not God," came back to haunt him. Only now, those very legs had become shackles, dragging him down into the abyss. The tragedy was no longer a threat. It had erupted in full force. Falling into the abyss after the storms of scandal, the final verdict came down. The club tore up his contract, cutting every tie. Fans who once roared his name now gathered outside the stadium, torching jerseys that bore it. Black smoke billowed upward, curling like the judgment of an entire nation against its fallen idol. Inside his mansion, he sat alone within four cold walls. What was once a dream had become a gilded prison. The laughter of party friends had vanished, leaving only the hollow echo of emptiness. He picked up the phone, no one answered. The bedroom door swung open. Closets stripped bare, the safe emptied. The young wife who once walked red carpets on his arm had vanished without a trace, carrying away all that remained. He was destitute. No family, no friends, no fame. Football turned its back. The crowd spat curses. The press smeared his name. The prison gates closed. A sentence for drugs and moral scandal transformed him from a million-dollar superstar into an exile, a pariah. On the endless nights that followed, he bent over his trembling legs. Legs once hailed as golden were now like rusted iron, chains dragging him down into a bottomless chasm where no light remained and no hand reached out to save him. Inside the rehab, the walls were a dull gray, the barred windows cold and unwelcoming, a place where there were no cheering crowds and no stadium lights. Only low moans and the dull thud of bodies writhing under the weight of craving. He lay there, gaunt, hair matted, eyes hollowed and rimmed in purple. Each wave of withdrawal shook him to the core. His whole body trembled, sweat soaked him through. His jaw clenched as if it might snap. The legs once praised like treasure now convulsed, so weak they could no longer lift him. His toes quivered. His feet went icy and useless, like dead weight that belonged to someone else. He screamed, banged his head against the wall, called out the names of the luxuries that had abandoned him. All he met in return was a thick, choking silence, as if the whole world had already turned its back. There was no music, no light, only the slow, relentless ticking of the clock, each second underlining the fall of a soul that once stood at the summit. One night, in the blur of a fevered haze, he whispered, his voice breaking, "God, where are you?" The lost question echoed through the damp rehab ward. No answer came. Yet inside that hush, something waited, a faint shaft of light piercing the darkness, ready to open a turning point in his life. The reunion one drizzly morning, the iron gates of the rehab swung open. He sat quietly on a worn wooden chair, body frail, eyes hollow. Suddenly, footsteps he knew by heart echoed down the hall. He lifted his head, and there they were, faces once so close they cut like glass now. The old coach leaned on his cane, hair silvered, eyes heavy with sorrow yet glowing with warmth. Beside him stood a few former teammates, the very men he had abandoned, left behind in the rain. They did not scold, nor spit blame. They simply placed a hand on his shoulder. One of them finally spoke, his voice tight with emotion. "We've been praying for you. Put this cross back on." The words rang out like church bells piercing the silence. In that moldy room, reeking of sweat, smoke, and despair, the sentence flung a door wide open. He froze, and a heart long hardened began to tremble. Eyes once dry from arrogance welled with tears. For the first time in years, he felt an unseen embrace brush against his soul. Not the crowd, not the fame, not the fleeting illusions of glory, but something deeper, purer. And in that fragile moment, he realized perhaps God had never left him at all. Forgiveness and redemption that night. In the cramped rehab room, he tossed and turned, unable to sleep. The words, "We've been praying for you," echoed in his mind like a refrain that refused to fade. On the worn wooden table, his teammates had left behind a weathered Bible. He opened it, hands trembling. One verse burned its way into his heart. "Those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be lifted up." He broke down. Tears streamed down his face, soaking into the very words on the page. For the first time in years, he felt small, like a lost child longing to be held. The next day, the old coach returned. He shared his own story, a blazing youth, a career at its peak, then a devastating injury that ended it all. He confessed how he had drowned himself in alcohol, destroying everything, drifting without direction. But then the Bible found him, pulled him out of the pit, turned a broken man into someone who now lived for Christ. Hearing this, the player collapsed in sobs, burying his face in the coach's calloused hands. All the pride, all the fleeting glory shattered, leaving nothing but a shattered soul crying out for forgiveness. That night, for the very first time, he knelt and whispered a prayer, "Lord, please don't leave me." And in that moment, a heart as barren as a desert felt rain again. A strange peace flooded in, one no stadium, no roaring crowd, no earthly victory could ever give. And open-ending the day, he walked out of rehab. The sky stretched wide and clear, as if freshly washed. His body was still frail, his legs not yet strong enough to run as before, but in his eyes shone something new, peace and hope. He returned to the poor neighborhood where he was born. On a patch of dirt, barefoot kids chased a worn-out soccer ball. He sat down, smiled gently, then joined them. There were no roaring crowds, no blinding stadium lights, only the laughter of children and their bright eyes fixed on him. Soon, he started a free soccer class for underprivileged kids. With every kick, every pass, he taught more than just technique. He planted lessons of humility, faith, and hope. One evening, as the children's laughter echoed through the narrow streets, he lifted his eyes toward the distance. There, the National Stadium glowed under floodlights, like a paradise he had lost. He watched it for a long while, then whispered softly, Will God give me one more chance to return? The screen fades to black. Only that question lingers like a knock on the audience's heart, urging them to reflect on pride, forgiveness, and the second chances God still offers to the broken. Special chapter: when glory turns into chains in the history of soccer, the world has seen this story play out time and again. A poor kid from the back streets, blessed with raw talent, suddenly shines like a star, worshipped as a god on the field. The press hails him as the one chosen by God, a gift from football to humanity. But with fame comes temptation, and sometimes the very light that lifted them up becomes the fire that burns them down. Think of George Best, who once said with bitter wit, "I spend a lot of money on booze, birds, and fast cars. The rest I just squandered." Or Paul Gascoigne, England's tragic genius, trapped in a lifelong battle with alcohol, depression, and emergency hospital visits. Diego Maradona, both saint and sinner, was adored in Naples, only to be dragged into the abyss by cocaine and doping. Adriano, the Emperor of Brazil, whose thunderous shots once shook the world, was undone by alcohol, drugs, and grief that hollowed him out. And even Ronaldinho, the smile of Brazil, after dazzling the stadium lights, stumbled into legal troubles and personal scandals. All of them share a cruel truth. From blinding heights, they fell into darkness in the blink of an eye. A broken leg, a failed doping test, a leaked sex tape, an addiction that wouldn't let go. Careers that seemed eternal ended in isolation. Glory became shackles. Yet from their tragedies, football and life itself leaves us with a hard lesson. Talent is a gift, but arrogance turns that gift into a curse. Not the legs, not the fame, not the roaring crowds, but faith and humility alone can keep a soul from being swallowed by the storm. The character in our story isn't just one man. He is a mirror reflecting countless real stars. He is the symbol of every gifted player who trusted his own strength more than the one who gave it. And just as in real life, the final question remains unchanged. When God grants us a second chance, what will we do with it?